very excited to introduce Wilson Withiam, one of the Messari analysts who's been burning the midnight oil to put together these 50 different presentations from various crypto asset projects and protocol teams. Wilson, take it away, set the stage.
Perfect. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate the intro. My name is Wilson Withiam. I'm a research analyst here at Messari. I do a lot of my, most of my focus is on base layer platforms, especially in the smart contract space. So while the talk is on the state of Web3, I kind of put my own twist in it, state of Web3 from the ground floor. So specifically looking at those base layer platforms today and their impact on the Web3 web stack or Web3 technology stack. So to kick it off, we kind of want to start about why it matters, why we're here trying to do this work on this Web3 movement. So the idea coming from Web 2.0, you have these walled gardens of information, and it's kind of run by these data hoarding middlemen that can exploit user information for their advertising profit. The Web3 kind of opens this up in a different light, in a sense that you kind of have like these this open framework, these open data pipelines that you enable to transfer information freely across a single platform or multiple platforms that can work their way up into what we call, or what Tom Shaughnessy termed blended apps, which I really like that term in the sense that it kind of pulls this data from multiple different sources to create these new interfaces. And I think it's a little bit, I'd say, misconstrued in a way. The idea of trying to give self-sovereignty over data is kind of a tough sell. But the idea that we can create these new open platforms that would improve the developer experience of creating these applications and can create these new novel applications on the front on the consumer side is what's really going to be that substantial improvement of Web3 over Web 2.0. So on the smart contract side, so most of those, like I said, smart contract layer is pretty much the base foundation of all of this. So diving into that, some of the recent trends to watch, smart contract market is very crowded at the moment. We've had a huge influx of new networks that joined over 2018, 2019. I think it was over 30. We have another 11, potentially 11 that would launch this year, with 4 in beta at the moment. But you're starting to see that trend starting to decrease at this time. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that you had this huge influx of capital during the 2017 years, 2017, 2018 years. Once that started to die off and investors got a little bit more conservative on what's going on, the money wasn't as free flowing and the market was flooded by all these markets, you're starting to see this downtrend. So I think the key takeaway here is that pretty much what we have is existing, and what's in the immediate pipeline is pretty much going to be make up the market for the moment. Won't have too many curveballs thrown in there with new platforms coming, at least in the short to medium term. The other recent trend to watch within the at the platform layer is you're starting to see this trust in staking and proof of stake networks start to grow. So the total value locked in staking networks has increased almost 1,300% since the start of 2019, and since that's only about a year and a half. You're starting to like proof of stake. We're going to talk about it later. It's becoming the preferred consensus mechanism choice of a lot of these platforms out there. And what you're starting to see is this contraction between the amount of value stored in staking contracts or deposited on the network and locked versus the total value of these networks. And we should start see that continue to that ratio continue to contract, and might even more so as soon as ETH 2.0 launches at some point, either later this year or potentially next year. Phase 0, ETH 2.0. So kind of digging into some of the kind of like the bigger concepts within the base layer market. So we talked a little bit about how launches are on the decline at the moment, but what we're starting to see is like upcoming platform launches We had 4 launch earlier this year. We have about potentially 7 more to launch by the end of the year, maybe into next year. And what is interesting about this group that's launching is they were the ones that kind of raised a lot of the money during those 2018 years. We're going to it's going to be critical, especially in this crowded market, to have the funds available to actually incentivize users to join the platform, to incentivize developers to come and build on your platform. And so the amount of funds that you have available to do that is going to play a huge role in actually winning attention from other players, because a lot of these different platforms are going to be kind of picking from similar developer and user pools going forward. So just something to keep an eye on as we go ahead. So the other thing that is interesting about this network is how crowded it is at the moment. But we kind of have this open source ethos, and that's what crypto was was very much built upon. And but what happens if this smart contract market kind of turns into a zero-sum game, in a sense where it's a winner-take-all scenario? I'm not too sure if I'm quite there yet. It might be winner take most, but as we start to as a lot of these platforms start to kind of go after that same developer and user pool as we talked about, there's going to be some competitive dynamics, and you could see a lot less collaboration happen between some of these projects. Those competitive dynamics are really going to start to accelerate, and a lot of this, VCs could act as a catalyst as they're looking for ROI on their investments. They could start try and push forward the fact that maybe there's less of an open source ideology, and you start kind of keeping the secret sauce from some of these platforms behind some walls, or you might even start to see an increase in the number of patents issued. I haven't seen that yet, but it'd be something interesting to see it play on. And you can see in the meme there, we have this idea of Ethereum and friends. But a lot of these platforms, whether they want to admit it now, whether they're small, it's definitely going to be a competitive market going forward. And then all eyes are going to be on Ethereum 2.0's Ethereum's transition to Ethereum 2.0. It's definitely going to be one of the most defining events over the next few years in the crypto space, let alone the smart contract space. Don't spend too much time on the slide because we have a great ETH 2.0 update coming up later, but this will have a foundational moment within the competition as well, because you have a Ethereum 2.0. Ethereum is hands down the leader in the market right now, and I think there's no question about that, considering the number of developers and apps it has on its platform. But so this transition can either solidify it as the next, as the platform that can handle not only the DeFi space and how it's handling transactions at the moment, but can actually handle a lot more, and maybe even built off that world computer narrative that it had first kind of advertised in 2015, 2016 when it was first launching. Because with the ability to actually handle the scale of other applications, that's what ETH 2.0 would eventually allow. But at the same time, it's a very complex and drawn out process to get this platform launched. And this kind of opens a little bit of a window of opportunity for some of these other networks to potentially hop in, utilize some of the dizzying amount of funds that they raised during 2017, 2018, and maybe take in some of the developer pool and user pool that would otherwise be using on Ethereum. So you kind of have like this window of opportunity. We don't know how long it's going to be. Could be 2 years from now, could be 5 years from now, but we'll definitely be interested in see it play out. So also on this, we talked about the continued rise of staking. Proof of stake has easily become the preferred consensus mechanism. Proof of stake and its variations have become the preferred consensus mechanism for new network launches. and you see we're going to have even more coming over the next year or two. It's not surprising. Staking really has kind of like this built-in incentive for people to acquire the token and join in on the network. You know, the concept of I'm able to hold my token and earn rewards definitely has a strong selling point. So it's a great way to get people to join in and participate in the network. It also is beneficial on the trying to get on-chain governance up and started, having people actually hold token stake on the network and be able to join on the voting side. Now there are shortcomings to it, which we'll address in a couple slides, but that's the reason that's kind of driven a lot of platforms to proof of stake, in addition to the concept that it's more energy efficient than burning computational power to in the proof of work mechanism. So when it comes to staking, we had a lot of talks about centralized finance yesterday and the rise of exchanges. They're really becoming prominent players in the staking space as well. As users rush to generate some sort of staking yield or earn staking rewards, you're starting to see a massive amount of people, instead of downloading, instead of transferring their assets to their own wallet, staking with with delegators in more of a non-custodial type service, they tend to leave their assets on these exchange platforms and stake with that platforms. And a lot of like Coinbase, Kraken, Binance have really have seen this kind of trend and started running their own staking and validator services. So that's why you're seeing this enormous increase in the number of assets that are actually being held on exchanges, like staking assets held on exchanges. And this has increased ever since Coinbase opened up staking to all of its US customers back in November. So you can see this trend is increasing substantially since that time. And considering that users prefer convenience, will always tend to choose convenience over self-sovereignty, this could continue to increase in the short to medium term. The other aspect is you have this increase in voting power distribution. Decrease in distribution. As these exchanges are getting a bigger portion of the network, as they as more coins are actually being held on these exchanges, especially when it's paired with an on-chain governance system. When in something like Tezos, and this is just an example, they're starting to get a greater share of the network and more kind of like this undue influence over the platform. It's not entirely a concern because it's not too undifferentiated from something like mining pools. But and then on top of that, you have exchanges. They have a lot of money invested into having these assets on their platform, having the staking services. So they're incentivized to keep these networks up and running and healthy. But like I said, I kind of touched on it a little bit there. Proof of stake isn't foolproof. There are definitely some general concerns and misconceptions about staking rewards. It's a less battle tested security model compared to proof of work. It hasn't been around for as long. Has less understood attack vectors. We're still finding out new ones every day. And I think trying to get a better understanding of what is the inflation and tax rewards, tax impact on stake rewards. So you see this high amount of return that you could potentially get by staking on a certain network. That may not necessarily be the case because you need to factor in what kind of tax is going to be on that on those returns, and then what is the inflation of the network? Because in the next bullet point down, we're looking at staking rewards are really just a wealth distribution. It's going from people, the actual percentage of the tokens of that network and network ownership is being redistributed from not people who aren't staking to people who are staking. So you kind of have this floor level of people who are staking, where they'll never go below a certain percentage of network ownership. And that becomes a little bit more problematic, especially when you couple it with an on-chain governance mechanism. So we have a couple of movements going on at the base layer to improve some of the two of the critical, I guess you could say, concerns or problems that we're kind of run into from time to time. And the first one is looking to increase scalability, increase the rate of transaction. So a lot of the blunt early attempts were increasing block size or lowering validator count, and that was especially seen in DPoS chains like EOS and Tron. But we're starting to see a huge influx in the number of opportunities to scale, both at the base layer and then building off of that into those second layers. That seems to be a little bit more promising. So you have and all of this to try and kind of beat out this kind of this scalability trilemma that we have here of trying to maximize scalability while keeping decentralization and security intact. We also have a new wave of interoperability solutions coming in that could be huge in case there is some sort of multi-chain future. And quick on the outlook, all this new infrastructure that we're starting to see with scaling coming and interoperability measures improving, this new infrastructure could enable new apps that can inspire user adoption. And so we like to say, hey, we're focusing too much on the infrastructure. These two things kind of happen in cycles. So apps will lead us to build the infrastructure to support new apps, and then new apps will actually come in there. So we're kind of going through another cycle of seeing where this interoperability and scalability infrastructure can actually, what applications can actually be built off of this new infrastructure. And I think one important point to end with is that the best technology may not always win. So some of these platforms that have best interoperability standards, the best scalability, that may not always win. And so an example I have here is the number of primitives that are built off of Ethereum at the moment. And this is how you can kind of see how that stack can be built up one over the next, and how these new applications can kind of build off of these lower level protocols and applications. So this is that kind of idea of blended dApps, and you want to see this progress over time. So maybe Ethereum doesn't have the newest, latest technology, but it definitely has the stack there to support these new applications that could bring new users in. So this is something that you want to keep an eye out on for these new platforms going forward.
Perfect.
Steve, right. Yep.
Nicely done, Wilson.